Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you're watching The World Report on News6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Following US President Trump's threat of imposing 200% tariffs on French luxury goods, French President Emmanuel Macron has hit back at Davos, saying that he will not give in to bullies. Amid the escalation between NATO and the USA over Greenland, President Trump has again slammed NATO, saying he has saved the alliance from the ash heap of history. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has reaffirmed his country's support for Greenland and Denmark's sovereignty at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Venezuela's National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez has announced broad reforms in the laws amid the new political content following the capture of Nicolas Maduro by a U.S. military operation. US President Donald Trump has expressed support for his Syrian counterpart, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who launched an offensive against Washington's erstwhile Kurdish allies, saying a choir boy could not handle the situation in Syria. A video published by the U.S. Southern Command on X shows what they say is a United States seizure of another tanker in the Caribbean, the seventh ship apprehended since President Donald Trump announced a blockade to prevent sanctioned vessels going to or from Venezuela. OpenAI is rolling out age prediction on ChatGPT globally to determine whether an account is likely owned by a minor, as the artificial intelligence startup prepares to allow adult content on the popular chatbot. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is seeking to revive its case accusing Facebook parent company Meta Platforms of bolstering an illegal monopoly by acquiring Instagram and WhatsApp. Now for this hour, we start with U.S. and NATO. U.S. President Donald Trump has rejected an invitation to attend an emergency G7 meeting about the Ukraine war, proposed by French President Emmanuel Macron. Trump, speaking at the White House briefing, said he could not participate in the meeting despite Macron's earlier suggestion. The French leader had sent a private message regarding the meeting, which was expected to be held in Paris. However, Macron later announced that the emergency G7 gathering would not take place this week. Trump has said that he was not interested in attending the meeting, making it clear that he would not engage in the talks at this time. Let's listen in.
Will you still go to Paris for the G7 emergency meeting as offered by President Macron?
No, I wouldn't do that. Because, Emmanuel's not going to be there very long. And, there's no longevity there. He's a friend of mine. He's a nice guy. I like Macron. But he's not going to be there very much longer, is he?
Speaking to reporters, Trump also slammed British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron, saying that the leaders get a little rough, but he still enjoys a good relationship with them. Let's listen in.
They've got to straighten out their countries. You can't, London is having a lot of problems, and if you look at Paris, got a lot of problems. They have two problems, immigration and energy. They got to stop with the windmills, and they got to go back like UK has an unbelievable asset called the North Sea. Norway uses it, makes a fortune. They have a better section of it, and they don't do it. They could straighten out their countries, and it would be good. But I get along very well.
President Trump also took to his social media platform, Truth Social, to slam NATO, saying that he saved the cross-Atlantic alliance from the ash heap of history and that NATO wouldn't exist without him. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Asta Chada. She's an Associate Professor of International Relations, joins us live from Kyoto, Japan. Thank you very much, Doctor and Professor, for joining us. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Chada, do you think that Trump is still interested in brokering peace? From your analysis, where do you think he stands in terms of, brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine?
I mean, he is still very interested in brokering peace, but on his own terms. I mean, we've seen how his stance kept flipping when he did not receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And at some point, I think out of anger, he even said, what's the point of, to the effect of saying that, what's the point of being a president of peace if nobody recognizes it? So he does want peace. He's created this board of peace for the newer sort of idea of governance of Gaza's territories, for instance, that he's calling people on board for. So he has an interest there, but his interest lies on two major fronts. One, that he can then prioritize US national interests that go beyond US interests overseas, specifically when it comes to its allies. So we're talking about NATO, we're talking about the US presence in the Pacific, we're talking about US's overall policy towards the Indo-Pacific. Those would need to take a back seat if his idea is to go forward in terms of US being represented first and America first. And the second idea or in his idea, the idea of peace is America gets to be as expansionist as President Trump wants it to be. So in case of Arctic security, for instance, his calculation is that Denmark has no military resources that would be sufficient to protect Greenland from a possible or a plausible alliance between Russia and China and their influence, whether it's military influence, just the geographic presence that they have, or even their economic presence in the Arctic. So, given those calculations, when he is aiming at peace, it is a very specific definition of peace, which does not rule out invasion, which does not rule out going beyond the confines of sovereignty of another nation, but it does centralize in some way his idea of America first, or his idea of US interests first.
Right. And this about the NATO's capability and capacity, how do you analyze their capacity and capability to stop this rift from widening between Trump and them? Do you think that Trump has just exposed that the rift that was already there, or the disalignment which was just waiting to be exposed?
I mean, I wouldn't say that there was a rift that, or a chasm that big that NATO would fall apart. I mean, on the contrary, they've had several such episodes in the recent past, and they've been able to sail through them one way or another. But there are these two events that have happened very recently, which do put a big question mark on the future of NATO. And I mean, it doesn't mean that NATO would need to have a fallout completely, but the idea is that NATO would cease to exist as we thought it would in some way. Like you said, exposing some little cracks, and one of those is this issue of Greenland and US's let's say obsession with some sort of a acquisition of Greenland in its entirety, and the fact that there is refusal from European powers, specifically the NATO allies of United States. They're refusing that, they are trying to resist that, and President Trump has decided to impose tariffs, an increased percentage of tariffs on them. So what we are hearing from within Europe is, how do they make sure that they find other partners? Now, other partners might not mean partners that are militarily very strong, but other partners means they need more voices from across the globe to support their stance. And they've found those voices from within Europe. They found those voices in allies like Canada, for instance. And second thing that they're trying to talk about is retaliatory tariffs. Now, we don't know how effective those would be, but definitely as a signal, retaliatory tariffs do show that European allies are going to continue to refuse the support of US acquisition of Greenland. And third thing that they tried to, when I heard President Trump speaking as you were playing his video earlier, President Macron had proposed a meeting, a G7 meeting in Paris, and it looks like President Trump is not interested in that meeting, and he's clearly stated that he would A, not attend it, and B, he would rather, and that's how I interpret his words, he would rather prefer to meet individual European leaders like he's doing in Davos on his own terms. He would rather continue with his tariff policy, whether it's on France or any other country that tries to threaten the United States and its possible acquisition of Greenland, over them meeting together and then kind of making a coalition of the G7 where it's the US versus the rest. So he's trying to avoid that sort of a setup, and though he would want to engage in dialogue, but then his idea of dialogue is where he gets to centralize US interests and all the other parties agree with it.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And Building on your answer, U.S. is more interested in pursuing their own interest, and U.S. even has President Trump has sent invite for many countries to join Board of Peace, right? So, don't you think this invite that has been sent, and some has rejected, some has been skeptical about it, and some of them have only said that they have gotten the invite, but they haven't really shown any concrete steps on where do they stand. So how do you think that these things of the reaction from Western countries towards this Board of Peace, criticism from the Board of Peace, and the ABC that you mentioned, how to find Europe is trying to find other countries, other allies, and the retaliative tariffs and G7 meeting request. Don't you think this is a further making them not closer but farther, these Western allies, the traditional allies, and U.S.?
I mean, see, I think several analysts are interpreting this as a move by President Trump and his administration to build a parallel network of sorts, or a parallel infrastructure, or a parallel, like security architecture, security infrastructure, that goes together with the UN. So we know UN and UNSC have failed to achieve any sort of peace. I mean, they have consistently failed in being the voice of defending international law and global liberal international order. So this alternative that President Trump is proposing in the name of Board of Peace then comes with a different set of rules. So unlike the UNSC, or unlike the United Nations that functions with a P5 and then all states have one vote, that kind of a democratic setup, this Board of Peace seems to be like paying your way into the membership. I mean, the very little details that are out talk about how it would be a 3-year renewable membership, and any state that wants to be part of it has to pay upfront $1 billion in contributions, so on and so forth. What are the objectives of this Board of Peace? We don't know. But what is definitely clear is that US will be central, US will be in control. US would not share power in that, which is why it is driving a lot of states into skepticism as to what is United States trying to achieve with this alternative mechanism that it's proposing. And then look at NATO allies. Weren't they an alliance already? An alliance is not just built on contributions or defense spendings, or helping a partner, or helping a country that you align with. Unlike what President Trump was mentioning earlier, that he rescued NATO from ash heap of history. Alliance is also meant to defend in times of need. Alliance is built on trust. If states do not have that trust, if they could just buy their way into a Board of Peace, it is anybody's guess what sort of an international order is being established here. I mean, definitely not a liberal one. So, I don't know as to what extent other states are going to be able to find their way into this Board of Peace, or if they're finding President Trump's tactics valuable in terms of their own personal objectives. But what we can see clearly is that if you're talking about an alliance, if you're looking at NATO, if you're looking at Canada, we are seeing a lot of anxiety through and through. So this issue is no longer a Venezuela issue. Venezuela did not have the kind of voices supporting it that probably Greenland is fighting, given the fact that Denmark is, pretty much their central, and Greenland's sovereignty rests not only with Denmark, but also within Greenland. Greenland is semi-autonomous, and Greenland has for the longest time maintained a policy of not about us without us, which means they want to be part of any decision making. So let's see, how this goes forth. But what we can surely, conclude from this is that there is a clear breakdown of trust, or at least trust there has been hurt to the extent that we are seeing a very long-standing alliance experiencing fractures.
Thank you for highlighting that and sharing that with us on NewsXYR, Dr. Chadha. Great learning from you. Now we move on to South America. The U.S. military has seized a Venezuela-linked tanker in the Caribbean, marking the 7th such capture since the start of U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign to control Venezuela's oil flows. The Southern Command said the motor vessel Sagitta was apprehended without incident. This move demonstrates the U.S. resolve to ensure only lawful oil leaves Venezuela with a focus on ships operating in defiance of sanctions. The vessels intercepted in the past have been either under U.S. sanctions or part of a shadow fleet of ships that disguise other origins to move oil from major sanctioned producers Iran, Russia, or Venezuela. Trump has said the U.S. plans to control Venezuela's oil resources indefinitely as it seeks to rebuild the country's dilapidated oil industry in a $100 million plan. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Matthew Vadum. He's an American author and journalist, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadum, for joining us and staying with us. Now thank you. Now looking at this, can we say the situation is escalating between Venezuela and U.S. even after Nicolas Maduro is gone, as we see this Venezuela-linked tanker still floats around in global waters or in Caribbean, and U.S. is targeting them?
I'm not sure that I would use the word escalation, but because that implies that there's a higher level, of activity going on. But the Trump administration continues to apply pressure to Venezuela by seizing sanctioned tankers. This was the seventh tanker that the United States has seized off of that it associates with Venezuela. Apparently, it's a Liberian flagged tanker named Sagata, and the U.S. government, the U.S. military has been very tight-lipped, has not provided a lot of details on what the legal justification was for taking it or what they're going to do with the tanker. But certainly, President Trump is continuing to exert pressure on Venezuela, and he wants to control the oil flowing, the oil that Venezuela is shipping outside of the country, and he's made that clear to the government in Venezuela that he's going to continue to do that. I don't know how long this pressure will continue, but it could continue. It could keep going indefinitely.
Right. So, as you mentioned, it's not an escalation. Why is U.S. continuing this even after Maduro's been taken?
Well, there are a number of reasons. Part of it is and this is not something the Trump administration states baldly, and that's because Trump wants to squeeze China. He wants to prevent oil. China was a major purchaser of Venezuelan oil, and he doesn't want oil going to. He doesn't want oil going to the People's Republic of China, which he views as an international adversary of the United States, as well. He views taking these tankers as a kind of reparations, as a kind of payback for Venezuelan past seizures of U.S. energy companies' assets. So, some of the tankers have had civil judgments or civil attachments to them, and the United States seized them to pay off debts. I don't know if that's the case with the seventh tanker, Sagata, but that's why he's been doing it. But the overall goal is to put pressure on Venezuela to do what the United States wants it to do.
Thank you for sharing that insight with us, Mr. Vadum. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he had a very good call with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. This comes after Erdogan's bitter criticism of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's persecution of the war in Gaza. Earlier, Netanyahu has expressed his opposition to the U.S. placing top representatives from Turkey and Qatar on the Board of Peace's Gaza Executive Board, which will be playing a key role in the oversight of the post-war management of Gaza. Even Trump had also said that he was going to have very important call with Erdogan. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Matthew Vadum, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadum, for
Sure.
staying with us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, looking at this, do you think that, U.S. president is, even though he knows that, Turkey, Qatar, and Israel don't really get along, but why do you think he has put Turkey and Qatar in this board of peace, regardless of Israel's criticism?
I think that President Trump wants as many major international players, major countries, to be involved in his International Board of Peace as possible, so that it can be a valuable tool for, promoting peace and order in the world. And he's courting countries like Qatar and Turkey because he wants to bolster its membership. I think Erdogan, it's reported that there was a very successful phone call between President Trump and President Erdogan, and that's all we know. That's all the news reports say. There was a very successful call, but then nobody's actually provided any details of what was discussed. Apparently, Erdogan is close to deciding whether Turkey is going to join the Board of Peace, and which is sprung out of the board that was established to administer Gaza. It seems to be like a spin-off project of it. And Trump wants a $1 billion membership fee for any country that's going to be a member of the Board of Peace. Presumably, it sounds like a lot of money, to you and me, but it's not to a major country. Presumably they have expenses that they're going to have to take care of, whatever form this Board of Peace is going to take. And as I've said before, we're not sure, is it going to be President Trump's own little miniature United Nations, negotiating deals on the side when the United Nations won't pull through for him. It's not really clear. But he wants maximum participation from countries that are interested in showcasing their power and their prestige on the international stage.
And do you think that, since this call is, like you rightfully mentioned, it's all under the wraps, what do we know so far about Board of Peace? And do you think that there is there's a chance that, or how do you analyze it being more political or more for peace? Where do you think that board stands?
Well, I don't think there's a dichotomy between politics and the pursuit of peace. I think they are more or less the same thing. So it's a false distinction there. But it would clearly be an international body that would come under the sway of the United States to a much greater extent than the United Nations has in recent years. And so perhaps President Trump views it, as I said earlier, like a mini United Nations that he will be able to exert greater control over in pushing an agenda. But the exact form that it's going to take is not really clear at this point. It's a fairly new. This proposal is only, I think, a few weeks old, and not a lot of details about it have so far been released.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Right.
Great learning from you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadum, for joining us. Now we move on to our next news. Russian Interior Minister Vladimir Koltsev has visited Cuba on January 20th, meeting with former President Raul Castro and current President Miguel Diaz-Canel. During the visit, Kolo-Koltsev has paid tribute to 32 Cuban combatants killed in a U.S. military attack in Venezuela earlier, and the talks between Kolo-Koltsev and Diaz-Canel focused on the global and regional context, with particular emphasis on the economic challenges Cuba faces due to the ongoing U.S. embargo. The discussions also highlighted Russia's support for Cuba in its struggles against external pressures. Now we move on to our tech news. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is appealing a ruling that dismissed its case against Meta Platforms. The FTC claims Meta violated antitrust laws when it acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, strengthening its monopoly over social media platforms. Although the FTC did not block these deals in the past, it filed a lawsuit in 2020 arguing Meta's dominance harmed competition. A U.S. district judge dismissed the case, citing competition from TikTok. Meta responded by asserting that the court decision was correct, emphasizing their focus on innovation and competition. The FTC, however, remains firm, arguing that Meta's monopoly continues to harm American consumers. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.